All
Um,
right. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know we're expecting several more, so I'll just keep an eye on the waiting room. We are recording, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Amanda Latre. I'm the WiSE Program Support Coordinator. I think everybody knows me, but I feel like I have to say that when we get started here. Um, this is making your portfolio stand out. So I'm very excited about our program today. I think it's going to be really helpful to all of you. I think everyone I think everyone is a WiSE-FPP associate with us today. And just a very gentle reminder, you've heard this from me several times, but your portfolios are due May 3rd, as well as the minimum of 5 credits. So today is going to be a really great program to get you thinking about your portfolios, polishing those up. And as always, if you have any questions, just letting other people in here, hold on. If you have any questions about the portfolio requirements or the credit requirements, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. So that's it for my announcements. Without further ado, I do want to introduce our wonderful speaker for this afternoon. I want to thank him very, very much for taking time with us on this beautiful afternoon to be with us. So Dr. Dan Olson-Bang is Director of Professional and Career Development at the Graduate School. He is absolutely a friend of WiSE. He's always a wonderful support to us and to our students and to our postdocs. So if you have not met Dr. Olson-Bang yet, this is a great session for you to be a part of, not only to hear his talk, but to get to know him as a resource available to you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. I guess, can I call myself a wise guy? Is that an okay way to describe
You are a wise guy.
being
Oh, by the
affiliated?
way, I should mention Dr. Olson-Bang has a great sense of humor. So he
You'll you'll
does.
you'll be able to figure out whether that's actually true or not over the course of the next you know, whatever number of minutes. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be there, right? I guess we can't say be here. One note before I begin, it's all up to people's comfort levels, but it is it's intimidating to talk to a bunch of people in any room, and weirdly, it's more intimidating to talk to a room with black boxes with names in them. So if you are feeling courageous and you are willing to turn on your camera, that would be great. I love smiles and nods or anything that gives me a sense of it. That doesn't mean that I'm pressuring anybody, but it's just a little easier, I think, because I can understand where things are headed with you guys. So thanks for doing it. If not, that's also no problem. Um, so I have a tricky task over the course of this time because making your portfolio stand out as a rubric means that I have the unenviable task of trying to touch on um, different elements of several different things, right? Several different types of materials that you're probably asked. I know that you're asked to submit. And so I'll do the best. I feel a little bit like I'm going to be a rock skipping across a pond. And that means that if there are things that are particularly interesting that you'd like to hear about, um, feel free to let me know. I guess the chat's a good place to do it. At one point, we'll also do a CV review. But basically, what I want to cover, and cover is kind of the right word in this context, is the 4 main documents that you will do that you'll create in the course of applying for a professor gig, right? I'm right now up to my ears in that type of thing, in terms of helping people submit applications, getting negotiating underway, getting offers, sometimes not getting offers, and figuring out what's next. And so I definitely have my head in the zone as it goes. And I'm going to pay special attention to the things that you guys or people applying for jobs struggle with. So, you know, the core parts of your application materials are your cover letter, your CV, your research statement, and your teaching statement. I'd say that the 4 of those things will be required for 90% of applications. The diversity statement, I should also mention, is required for an increasing number And I think the share is somewhere around 25% of application materials right now. But maybe Amanda will invite me back and I can talk in more depth about specific things. But right now, I'm actually potentially gonna put that one to the side because of the high likelihood that you'll do the other ones. And I actually want to start with the two that I think people are most unsure of what to do, and that is the teaching and research statements. I'm going to talk comparatively less about cover letters because people do a great job at cover letters, actually. So I actually wanted to start with the teaching statement. And the reason I wanted to start with the teaching statement is that this teaching statement is underestimated and is secretly the most important document in terms of room for improvement. So if I were to talk about um, your materials collectively, most people can create a B plus or an A minus cover letter and CV. And most of you are going to be or are already being trained rigorously and repeatedly to do those things. Someone's telling you how to write these different documents, but people don't tell you as much about how to write the research statement and even less about the teaching statement. So I want to start with the research statement, actually, excuse me, the teaching statement, because it's the one that if everything else is a B minus or an A minus, somewhere in that range, your teaching statements, people's teaching statements, I'll say, tend to be somewhere around the F plus to D minus range when I encounter them. Which sounds really painful. Why would I start with the bad news? And the reason I start here is because it's not bad news. If we're talking about moving let's say a B to an A, first of all, that's very hard. And second of all, that's a lot less of a move than from a D minus or a D to even a B, right? You can make a huge impact. And the other thing is that while the other materials are often very helpful in getting people picked, you know, picked for interviews, many times when you're going on an academic job interview, regardless of the institution, they pepper you with questions about your teaching. And so the teaching statement is a really great sneaky way to make you think about your teaching and to have something to discuss in those contexts, because there are very few applications where that doesn't come up. And I've even had people, I worked with a grad student, and he and I worked on it a ton. And then he got a job. He got a job at an R1. And he said that they didn't even ask him to submit his teaching statement. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You worked so hard on that, and it came to nothing." And he said, "No, not true. Because we had discussed it and worked over it and worked on it and thought about it, he had lots of material for the million questions that they had for him during the interview." And so it's kind of the sneaky, um, you know, sort of the, I don't know, clandestine best document, in my opinion. So most teaching statements that I encounter have three things that people believe. And so it'll be something like creating critical thinkers, creating, demonstrating your passion for teaching. A teaching statement will say that you make yourself available for office hours, that you care about your students, that you do a combination of mini lessons and group work, and any number of other things, that you scaffold assignments, that you include diversity in your work. Does any of this sound familiar to anybody? So the problem with that, as you might imagine, is that I get that all the time. So if that's what's coming up in person after person's materials, don't you think they're tired of reading that? And in fact, they really are. So instead, I tell them, first of all, that a philosophy of teaching at the stage you're in, or that most of you are in, is unfair, unreasonable. You don't have a philosophy of doing something when you start off, right? You're learning how to do it, you're practicing your craft, you're mostly trying to get people to stop looking at their phones. At least if your experience is anything like mine. You know, you're adjusting on the fly, you're figuring things out, you're realizing that your assignment that you thought was crystal clear isn't crystal clear. You're in the trenches, you're figuring it out. And it would be fair to ask you to write a teaching philosophy at the end of your long and prosperous career as a teacher. You're 85 years old, you sit back with your calabash pipe and your academic regalia, and you look back on a long career and you expound on what you've learned over many years, right? And we all know somebody who's 65, 75 years old. You think, you're an amazing teacher. How do you do it? And they give you pearls of wisdom. Um, and so I don't want to be audacious when I say this, but probably none of us, including me, have those pearls of wisdom in the first 5 years of our program. Am I right? Yeah. There it goes. I got some nods. And so instead, what I think is really important is for you to mine the experiences that you already have, the way your classroom is, the way your encounters with students have been, as a way of telling your audience about what you're like as a teacher. So what do I mean by that? I mean that teaching happens in a lot of ways. Teaching is sometimes about your office hours and encounters you have with students. Sometimes it's about a parent that calls you, or a recitation or discussion section where somebody asks a really good question. Sometimes it's about helping a student who's fallen behind, or an email that really stuck out to you. Now, most of you, even if you've been TAs and you haven't been an instructor of record for courses, have had something like that happen to you. And if that sounds like you, then you have the material for a teaching statement. I don't like to call it a philosophy. So here is how I like to rehabilitate this assignment. Does anybody know what inductive reasoning is? Inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning are the two, right? We mostly hear about deductive reasoning. Um, Deductive reasoning is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, right? That's a principle that then gets applied in a multitude of ways, right? That's deductive. You start with something and then you apply it in different ways. Inductive reasoning is the opposite. It's actually much closer to scientific reasoning. And in that case, what it is actually is you start off with a series of observations, and you make some kind of a principle out of it. You derive something from it. So what I like to do is have people write out 3 real, positive, if possible, experiences that they had. Just write the stories. You can anonymize a student, but you have student A, circumstance B, and circumstance C. So, you know, there might be a student one, but there might be a really cool assignment or field work that you had people do, somebody who complained to you and what you did about it, how you learned from a mistake, many different scenarios. And you write about it for a paragraph. And then you look back on it, preferably with the help of somebody else. And in looking back on it, you try to figure out, what does this say about me as a teacher? And that's where you have to observe. A lot of times people will write the story thinking that they know what the conclusion of the story is. I'm writing the story to show that I'm a student-centered person. And I find that when people start off that way, the anecdote never supports what they think it's going to support. So you really have to write it out and then read it as if it were somebody else's. And that's why I say it's helpful to have somebody else look at it. And if you do that, you know, your last sentence says, through this experience, I've learned to making myself available to students can be one of the most valuable ways that I can show that I care as a teacher. Now that is a cliche-free way of talking about student-centered teaching, isn't it? Or meeting students where they are, or any number of other things. And I want to show you my favorite teaching statement that ever came from this. It's a math postdoc actually at SU. And I love the way that she brings her classroom alive in the way that she opens it. And I've had several people imitate it, and I'm always really even happy with their imitations. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. And can everybody see that okay? Hopefully they can see it, period. Amanda, you can see it?
I can see it. I don't know if you can make it just a touch smaller.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Better?
I think that's better. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, this one's better? Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
I'll read the first paragraph or parts of it. My students are making curves with their hands and comparing them to shapes drawn on paper. They can tell which curve has a local maximum, but they are trying to tell what the derivative does on either side of it. They discuss this for several minutes before agreeing that the derivative is positive to the left and negative to the right. I ask them to give a short explanation of their reasoning to the class, and they help each other find wording that makes sense to everyone. On the left, the function is going up, so the slope is positive. Gestures accompany the words like a tilted hand showing an increased function. This is a typical day in my calculus class. Now, there's a lot of other content in here, and then there's stuff that as a non-STEM person, I just find completely puzzling. But she weaves in many wonderful things, but they're built around anecdotes and quotes, right? Oftentimes I'll look at somebody's draft of a teaching statement, and if I don't see quotation marks, I tell them it's probably not going to work. Because I want that. I want them to talk about what somebody said to them or what they said to somebody. And when I see quotation marks, I also understand that it's one person, right? It's not a story that says something like, whenever I introduce this assignment, I do X. That's not really a very good, not a very good story, right? When the classic way to open a story is, can anybody say what it is? What's a classic way to start a story? Once upon a time, right? Once, one time, one story. That's what makes a good story. It's not sometimes. Nobody, that's not the classic way to start it. It's about the singularity of it. For mine, I wrote about a student in my class who came to my office hours one time and said, I'm not happy with my grade. Anybody ever done that for you? It's painful. It's very painful. And I said, oh no, are you disputing my grade or your grade? And she said, no, 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 no. I am unhappy with how I'm doing in the class, and I want to know what I can do to improve, which is a very different thing. So we met weekly and we worked on certain things, and I reinforced skills, and we developed really a relationship. And she went on to write my favorite and my best paper of that semester and of many semesters, and really took ownership of her experience. And I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And that's the kind of thing, I anonymize the person, but that's the kind of thing that I think really stands out. If you find it memorable, somebody else might too. Once you've written these 3 paragraphs and these 3 concluding bits, in some cases, like the example I showed you, you're done. And in other examples, it may be that you'll put something at the beginning that outlines the experiences that you've had, although that risks being boring, frankly. And most of these will end by talking about courses that you're prepared to teach. There'll be something at the end of it that's, again, a little bit of housekeeping, something customized for each institution. So basically, once you've written this block, you're done. And it makes great teaching statements. I've done it many times, and this format, which is very open-ended, of course, works a lot. So I highly recommend it. Before moving on to other pieces, because I feel like I have to go at breakneck pace, do you guys have any questions?
So what's your opinion on citations for teaching styles in your teaching statement?
For teaching styles? What do you mean? Oh, like you talk about like bell hooks or something like that kind of a thing?
I have no idea what a bell hook is.
Oh, bell hooks is
like
is
a
a
flipped
pedagogy.
classroom versus a traditional classroom, and like sources for flipped classrooms in science.
I think you shouldn't talk about flipped classrooms. I think you should show what a flipped classroom of yours looks like.
Okay. So it
Because flipped
should,
classroom, I see it, but it doesn't amount to anything when people write it. Instead, show me your flipped classroom.
so let me rephrase my question.
Okay, sure.
So we talk about our flipped classroom and how we're implementing this in the class. Should we cite literature showing like how it works? Or so I have some, so I found in my field that most professors have no idea what a flipped classroom is. They're gonna look at that style and say, I don't see this working. This isn't what we do in our field. So I've been told to cite them, and then some people like that and some people don't. Like just literature sources on where it's worked in my field. Is that something we should be like, I don't know, what's your opinion?
Yeah, yeah. Most things that people do as teachers in classrooms have some sort of antecedent in some pedagogical literature somewhere. And I've actually done one godforsaken year of an education degree, so I kind of know where they come from to some extent. But I find that labeling things doesn't help, and could trip people up. So instead of saying that it's a flipped classroom, showing them your successes in a model that is effective and is really interesting is, I think, the way to go. Does that clarify? No.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Because maybe it's a field difference. So I'm in a STEM field as well. And I have heard including citations will separate you from people who just describe their experience, but not showing like empirically where it comes from.
Yeah, I've seen citations in these things. But what's funny about it is that the citations, yeah, I don't know. I'm looking for a model that doesn't really require the terminology or require the mechanism. And so what I'm really looking for is your experience. If everybody cited how they came to what they did, everybody would have to riddle it with citations. And actually, to an extent, I'm trying to get away from that formal way of doing it. It's actually, in a way, a little bit less of a formal document than the others. Not tremendously less, but it is less formal. And so consequently, I think that it's, you want to talk about you and your engagement with students. And I don't think citations are necessary to do that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Anybody else? This is sort of controversial. People are uncomfortable with it, and then I make them try it, and then they realize it's actually pretty good. So, and I should say about all of these things that in all of these cases, I'm looking to this particular thing that we're doing right now as a way of inducing you to come and get some feedback from me, or to see if I can be of help to you. So I can't possibly cover and account for everything, but I can look at your statement, and I believe I can make it better. So and all your docs. So I'm not the only set of eyes that I think should be on anybody's materials, but I think that I am one set of eyes that can help. So any other last minute questions before I move on? Okay. So where I want to go next is the research statement. And maybe people would say, what do you, who is not in this particular type of field, have to offer, so to speak, in terms of this? And what I'll say is that all of these documents, and this one with them, they're all a genre of writing. And I have a PhD in English, and I'm used to teaching genre writing. So they're actually highly ritualistic documents. And it's in succeeding at delivering on the ritual of it that I think things become effective. So I don't evaluate anybody's content. I don't tell somebody in the sciences, oh, that doesn't seem right. You need to go back and look at your data. That's somebody else's job. But what I do is help people to land on it, understand what's important about it, and make a decision in your favor. And that's actually what the job is. So a research statement, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to write a research statement, excuse me? Nobody knows, or somebody typing something, which is fine too.
Try to convince the university that you have the ability to carry on your research plan also in the coming several years and bring the funding in.
I like that explanation a lot. And what I like about that explanation is that it's forward thinking. A lot of people don't realize that what a research statement is actually not unlike what you did for your statement of purpose essay when you applied for a PhD or got into grad school. Because when you did that, you made largely what I would call an empty promise, right? When you apply for a program, you talk about the research that you're going to do and the partnerships and the collaborations. And even the people who do things the most similarly, nevertheless, there are differences. And sometimes those differences are huge. Very few people get through their dissertation and don't find that there were huge differences. And so it's an empty promise. And the empty promise is basically that you are going to cast your eyes into the future at a particular institution and talk about what it's going to take and what you're able to do to get yourself through the first few years of your pre-tenure life, such that when you go up for tenure, you'll get it. And of course, every institution is different, but the idea is if you can envision 3-4 years of work and talk about that in a convincing way, not in a sort of, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing way, which I see a lot, that means that somebody can look at this and say, I think this person could get through the first checkpoint on their way to tenure, which in many cases is a 30-year review, right? 30-year review, 6-year review. After that, you're granted your knighthood. And so that's the bar. And so part of it is you're going to have to do that kind of stuff. It's a believable picture of a future that you hope to create. So a university asks for this because it reveals in detail what kind of a scholar you've been. How good is your science? How well do you articulate the importance and impact of your science? I'm sure you guys hear impact entirely too often, but that's because who cares if it's just something you do? They care about the fact that it matters in some way in the world, which is, by the way, what impact is. It also demonstrates that ability to imagine yourself at this institution and in this next phase where you pivot from being a student to suddenly being, in many cases in your world in particular, a kind of entrepreneur attached to a university who's tasked with getting grants, right, getting intramural funding, working out a startup package, and then becoming a publishing machine in many of the R1 fields. And let's face it, the research statement is primarily aimed at those people. So it signals your vision. It should reflect an ambitious agenda, but also one that you really can do. So in every case, I always want to emphasize this about these documents. They're ritualistic. They have a structure, and nobody's interested in innovations in the structure. So a research statement is a statement with a big line in the middle. So on the left hand, or on page 1, let's say, is maybe in your first paragraph, a summation of what kind of scholar you are and what you've been doing in terms of your focus. It's an orientation paragraph. And then right after that, with few exceptions, some exceptions, but few, your next paragraph should start with my dissertation. It's really that simple, right? And it's going to serve essentially as a kind of a long form abstract of your dissertation that has to culminate in impact. And there are two types of impact that matter. One of them is the one that you think about a lot, which is, of course, publications. My work has been published in a number of peer-reviewed journals, and I have 3 first author publications and 2 forthcoming, right? That might be one form of impact. And the other one, though, is the implications of your research in the future. And so that's about like where this leads. And I think scientists, there's no place in academia where this leads or what this is going to result in or how this could matter in the world becomes clearer. Like my dissertation, I'll just be blunt, English PhD, it's not changing the world. And there was no implementation. I wasn't going to cure Alzheimer's or something like that. But for so many people in the sciences, I'm jealous of this. That's precisely what it's aimed to do. And people miss the boat by missing out on talking about the ways that their research can down the road or in the near term be applied and can become important in the world. And that's the other form of impact. The abstract portion of this should also establish your contour with respect to other scholarship. What that means is, you might be, for instance, creating something that is efficient and is effective in a way that things have not previously been. But if you don't tell me about what came before and what you are better than, or what your research is doing in a superior way, I miss out. And so the kind of relative discussion can be very important. And so that's basically what's going to happen for the first 50 to 60% of the document, right? That's the dividing line. And then the rest of it, and the reason I tell you percentages is to make a point. The rest of it is going to be future research. And the point that I want to make in that is that I find that people write 80-20 documents. So there's 80% great specificity, lots of information, tremendous depth about your dissertation and your current work. And then there's a little nub attached at the end that talks about doing something with this later. I'm going to continue this research. I'm going to apply to funding through the NIH, and this is going to be great at X institution. And what that says in terms of the empty promise is that you really haven't given good thought to this job or your future. You're not thinking about what you'll be like as a professional. And what that means in that kind of anemic last section is that you're unpersuasive about the primary thing that people want to be persuaded of, which is of scholarly potential. And so, there are lots of different ways of doing that, but the primary thing to think about is about collaborations, partnerships, funding. Some people might have various contracts or patents, either extant or on the way, but also about, and this is really important, about goals. And so that's something that I think is really sometimes lacking. So you're going to get kind of 3 years out of it. And what that means in the end is that your reader, your hiring committee, will know about your academic expertise and your specialties, your ability to win grants and funding, your strengths and abilities, and really importantly, they're going to learn about your fit in this institution. And it's not just about whether you have or they have a piece of equipment that you need. It's about whether you fill a niche. And that's where the research statement is going to be a bit more and sometimes quite tailored compared to a teaching statement, which is sock in a paragraph at the end that starts with "I am prepared to teach," and you look at their course catalog, you plug it in, and you send it. But in this case, it's going to be a lot more in depth potentially, because that's how you figure out, or how they figure out rather, your commitment and your vision. One last word on that before we go on and before I answer questions about this document. Of course, your work is technical. And of course, there is a lot of technical language. There may be visual aids. There may be all kinds of things in the document. And I think that is completely normal for the genre of the research statement. But you should recognize the multiplicity of people that read this document. So one of the people who reads it, and who's very important, is a dean or a provost or an assistant or associate dean. And that person is by no means guaranteed to be in your field. And even if they are in your field, they're not guaranteed to be in your sub field where you live. So if anybody's in arts and science and is a chemist, you've lucked out. Is that anybody here? Yeah, you lucked out, right? So at least if you were to apply hypothetically to this institution, because the Dean of Arts and Sciences is a chemist. And so you do pretty well. It'd be fine. But a person could apply to a job in the engineering school or in arts and sciences and get somebody who is a civil engineer, or get somebody who's a philosophy professor. And that person is looking at this and is looking at it with their own intentions in mind. Sometimes they make the final call. And so that means that you can put in technical language and you can make an argument that is technical and scientific in nature, but there have to be markers and signposts that will still appeal to a person, a schmo like me, or like a philosopher, or even somebody in biology, if you're a chemist, that will allow them to understand why this matters and why this is awesome and needed and urgent and valuable. And everybody can do that. That's something that everybody can do, but it's imperative that you do it too, because that's really what makes it the best. So one thing I didn't say prior to this is that it's typically, for a junior faculty job, a 2-page document. There are some people who have longer ones and a few people who have shorter ones, but I think that probably 2 pages would be a sweet spot for it. So I'm going to leave that there and then just try to see what questions you might have.
Dan, would you say, and I may have missed it, so I apologize, but would you say the teaching statement as well is roughly 2 pages?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Every now and then, yeah, good question, thank you. Every now and then somebody writes a 1-pager that's wonderfully concise and beautiful, but I find that people have a hard time doing a 1-pager that still is good.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, so my question is, in a nutshell, what is the structure of the teaching statement?
What is this pressure over it?
Structure of the teaching
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the structure. Great. And by the way, you have my daughter's name, so good job with naming yourself. So I think it'll be essentially 5 parts. Sometimes it's 4 parts. The middle, the body 3 paragraphs, will be each one anecdote, right? And at the end of each anecdote will be the application piece in a teaching statement. Your final paragraph is the "I am prepared to teach X." And a first paragraph either may or may not exist, because I liked the example that I showed you where you're in her classroom, right? And then later on in paragraph 2, this is what it's like in my classroom. But if you were to do a paragraph 1, it would be something like, in my time at Syracuse University, I've served as CA for X number of courses, and I've had the privilege of being able to work with a variety of different students. And, you know, like, so you kind of detail in a human way what you've done, what your experience is. There's some people, by the way, who have also been high school teachers or who have taught at community colleges or are instructors of record or many other things. And so if you're that person, it might be a benefit to do that preface. And then there are some people, of course, in the sciences who feel fairly profoundly unprepared to do this and feel like, well, I've only been a TA only, which I don't really think is true, but you know, I don't have instructor of record experience, and maybe you leave that paragraph out. For my part, in an English PhD program, I taught 12 classes before I left my program. So I was pretty much ready to retire once I was done with my PhD. And you could argue that I did. What other questions?
Hi, Dan. I had a quick
Nice to see you.
question. Hi, I had a quick question about, the research statement. So I'm wondering, about how specific you should be when you talk about, say, your dissertation work versus where you're going moving forward. Should you talk more broadly about the area, or should you also, describe what were the central themes, questions, empirical analysis, and how do you navigate that? Because you're also trying to say that this is what I've done and this is where I'm moving forwards. I think that's the point that I was.
Is it really annoying to say you've got to hit the sweet spot? And you do, right? You have to hit the sweet
Yeah.
spot. So a lot of people lard their teaching statements with lots of procedure. And I don't think that's a good idea. You could talk about your methodology. You could talk about equipment that you use and things like that. But some people, they make it almost like a step-by-step how I did my science. And that's not good, right? And so that's one form of over-specificity. Other ones might get too mired down in the technological stuff and miss the opportunity to think about some of these other elements. So what you want to do really is trace a thread through your work. So annoying to say that. Trace a thread through your work that talks about the kind of change that you're trying to do. Are you improving something, proving something, modifying something, right? What type of an argument are you making? What kind of a problem are you solving? The means to do that, possibly the means that other people have done to do that, and what's important and effective about what you in particular have been able to do, and of course potential and impact. So that looks a lot of ways. There's no one way that that's going to work for everybody, but I think that if you draw that thread and you don't lose that thought of how this is important, how this is making an impact, I think that you'll do pretty well. Is that okay as an
Yeah,
answer?
that sounds good. Thank you.
And Miriam, I would say that these would be single spaced, typically something like a 1-inch margin. Restrictions is that I'm not sure what that means. Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, it makes sense, but of course, when I'm looking at like maybe sometimes APA like that those strict things to follow, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, right. There are citation styles, and lots of them want you to do a double-spaced document. They're all single-spaced. Everybody does it single-spaced. I like, for visual eyeball friendliness, I like it when people skip lines rather than indenting between paragraphs. And I think, and that's primarily what I find people doing. Choose a readable font. Not everybody's as young as you. Not everybody's eyeballs are as good as yours. As a less young than I used to be person, I find that to be true for me. So people come to me with a 10-point font document in Garamond, and I just blink my eyes and ask for them to do something about it. Let's see. do you have advice on the differences in approach between compiling an academic? Yes. Do I have advice? Tiana, where are you? Let's see. Oh, there you are. Sorry. Thank you. Thanks for waving. This is geared to, I'm gearing this right now to faculty positions in the sort of rubric of the FPP and this particular set of documents. The differences in a non-academic or industry position would be typically that you would do a cover letter and a resume being a 1 to 2 page document that looks different than a CV. And that most of these things wouldn't be there. You wouldn't do most of these things for an industry job. And so in many cases that requires people to create a document that they don't have yet, to do something kind of from scratch. I'm very experienced with helping people to do that, and I'd be happy to help you with that. That's, it's just sort of a little bit to the side of what today's presentation is about. I hope that's okay. And I'd certainly be happy to meet with you to see what we can do to get those materials for you and for all of you. Is that okay? Good? All right.
Hi, Diane, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So for the teaching statements, like for different, like if I apply for different universities or institution, can I use the same teaching statement? But
Yeah.
but for the research statement, do I need to customize like a little bit? Because like, I don't know if it's true, like for some of the like a department, maybe they have like someone already did a similar research area as you did. You want to be like, can collaborate with them, but also do the future research in different, slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Certainly people, yeah, I think that the teaching statement with those changes that I suggested to you about how you change a first paragraph and a final paragraph potentially about your teaching statement. I find that research statements are largely the same. I'd say they're 80%, 75 to 80% the same, but there are things that you would be smart to change, right? If there are collaborations, you should mention them. If there are ways that you plan to use a regional resource, use them. For instance, I worked with a student who now works at a field station in the Adirondacks, but she had applied for academic positions and she had done a wonderful job, as a matter of fact. And she applied to Utica College, I think, because she wanted to do field work in the Adirondacks, which is where her research was. So she detailed the ways, and it was actually for not a primarily teaching institution, but she detailed ways that she would involve students and have a research team in that area, right? And so that's something that she wouldn't recycle if she were going to apply to University of Boulder or something like, or University of Colorado Boulder, because that's not where the Adirondacks are. So there are elements of it that I think, and it's typically toward the end of the research statement, that would in fact be modified.
Okay, but what about the research statement? Do we like?
That's what I mean, in the research statement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so what I just said is in reference to the research statement, not the teaching statement. Maybe I mix up the language all the time.
Thank you.
Others? All right, so in that case, I want to move on to probably the final document that I can discuss today, and that is the CV. Everybody's required to write a CV in your first year and your second year. Regardless, you have to do it, right? And a CV, of course, is a peculiar document, but you get lots of help with it. And so I'm going to just say a few brief words about a CV, and then I'm going to show us some CVs and we can discuss what's good about them, what's not so good about them. They're for people who got jobs, so good enough for somebody, right? So a CV is different from a resume in that a CV and Tiana, maybe this goes a little bit to your question. A CV is only used for academic or para-academic functions. So tenure track jobs, tenure and promotion, applying to be a dean, grants, research funding, conferences, things that are a lot like academia, and some research institutions are all places where you would use a CV. Everywhere else in the whole universe, you'd use a resume. It's just one of the other peculiarities of it. One thing to say also is that we use CV and resume in opposite ways of the way many British or formerly British colonized countries use them. So I'm going to use them in the US way. So the CV is the long one and the resume is the short one, is basically how I would say it. Unlike a resume, which is 1 to 2 pages, a CV, I don't know if anybody's looked up your PI's, your resume, or a CV rather. It's a horrible, horrible, sad experience, isn't it? It's like it would just unspool if you printed it out. What is, Mariah, what do you mean?
The CV?
It's thick, you're saying. Yes, yes. And I think for a lot of situations, people are like, yep, that'll do. And that's really something that's different. So I think a CV for somebody coming out of a PhD program should be, and this is probably not you right now, should be a minimum of 3 pages. Most people write a longer one, but that's the minimum. And a CV is very listy. And one thing to note about a CV is that it is an information storage device in a certain sense. You fill it full of stuff, and your job is to suss out of that stuff what you think your audience wants to see, and to a marriage anniversary on CV. I love that. Well, that person's got a job, so I guess it works, right? I'm just looking at that comment there. That's funny. It's like, names of your kids and your pet rock when you were 5. I mean, they're very exhaustive about academic things, except for this one example. But the CV is a document that contains information, and you try to prioritize and hierarchize information so that it's easily accessible. I have a friend of mine who does this kind of work, and she says that applying for a job is the only time when you are required to do a test when they give you the answer key. And that's something that I think people should remember. When you have a job post, they're telling you what they want. And you can do a little bit of research too about an institution and also figure that out. So typically, for instance, so everybody should know that there are 3 parts to the academic life. What are the 3 parts? Anybody know?
Research, teaching, service.
That's the 3-legged stool of academia. And your cover letter and your CV are both going to discuss those. It may be that your CV discusses service more or entirely versus your cover letter, which might only do research and teaching. And the part of the ritual of it is that you will have big block pieces, research and teaching, or teaching and research. And those go in a hierarchical order that demonstrates which one you believe is more important to the institution. So when people say, I'm applying to an R1 institution, that means you're applying to a briskly publishing place that has high expectations of your ability to get grants and publications. If you're applying to a position that requires you to teach 3 or 4 classes per semester, every semester, that means you're teaching, that means you're at probably not a Research 1 institution. Believe it or not, there are names for non-Research 1 institutions. I'll tell you what they are: Research 2 and 3. So confusing. So they would probably have you put the teaching first, and you might include more information about it as well. But your job is basically just to put it there, put down the hay where the goats can get it. If you're a Southerner, so a CV, it's, some of you probably have seen your professor, your PI's CV. It looks basically like it was done on a typewriter, transcribed from a napkin. And that's basically what it is. It's got 1-inch margins, conventional font, no pictures, nothing funny. It's reverse chronological order, and it's got 3 blocks. One says research experience, one says teaching experience, and one says service. And under that can proliferate many categories. And there are in fact many categories. So I wanted to sort of show you a couple of them that come from different moments in a student's experience, and we can just kind of look at some of the elements of it. Neither one is perfect. They both got jobs. So, and that's really the measure of perfect, isn't it? And so we'll take a look at them, and I invite you to weigh in on your thoughts about them, and we'll just go from there. The names have been blocked out to protect the innocent. So this person, what I like about this CV is that it is the 3-page CV, 1, 2, 3. And what's nice about that is that it shows a person in progress. This person actually got an industry job while doing the PhD and just kind of got out of there. I don't know if she actually finished her PhD, come to think of it. But it's nice because it shows what a CV would look like in progress. So maybe after a few years of your program, you could expect to see your CV bulked out in this kind of a way. And of course, you'll all expect to have GPAs of 4.0, right? No problem. That's a joke. Okay, so you see here that she is prior to finishing up her proposal, or is likely not there yet, because what you would normally see right here would be dissertation, colon, and it would be the title of the dissertation. And below that, it's pretty typical also to have advisor. When you're very, very close to the end of your program, you may also put the committee, which will be 3 other professors in most departments. So below, you get a little bit more of a sense of that. Now, one thing I don't like about her CV, or think it would be improved if she didn't do it, is you don't have to say when you start programs, including your current one, which if you feel like you've been doing this for a little while, or if you feel like that down the road, will be a welcome sigh of relief. So just when you graduate, and here you would say anticipated May 2028 or 32 or whatever time you plan on graduating. So PhD, MS, BS, or PhD, BS, or whatever the combination is. Her font is, simple, nothing exciting. And here you see that she starts off with research. And look at that. She's got teaching right there. She's got pubs down here, and then there's service. Now, it's typical that actually you would do a big block research experience or research section, maybe all caps, and then this might be below it, but you'll usually or often start off with your publications. And as this person has done, so the black is her name, right? So she's a first author on that, first author. That is cited as if it were just a paper in her field. And that's what you would do too, just cite it. So it may be that you pull those up. There are many other categories as well of publications. And so other ones that might be there would be manuscripts under review, manuscripts in progress, what's the other one I'm trying to think of? Forthcoming might be another one, or in press. Typically though, if somebody's going to publish something, they say they're going to publish it, it just gets pushed to the top of a list of publications. Because if the journal folded, but they said that they were going to publish it, it's all good. You just keep it, right? So that's kind of how it goes. Because you reasonably expect that they're going to publish your work. And here you have computer stuff. Some people put that, or they put it higher depending on the importance of those skills. There are many people in the life sciences who have lab experiences or lab skills that they particularly want to emphasize, and that sometimes comes close to below education. And then here, she basically details her work as a grad student as though it were a job, which I think is pretty cool. And so this shows the different things that she's done before. And then here you have her experience as a teacher. This time she actually was an instructor of record. Does everybody know what instructor of record is? I neglected to say that instructor of record is the person who's essentially giving the grade. You're in charge of the class. You designed it from the ground up in most cases, and you're the person who's you're gonna write those final grades. So that's the basic gist of it. In many cases, people will not include these blurbs about what they did and how it goes. But I think it can be valuable, and sometimes it's kind of a missed opportunity if it's not there, because it gives an opportunity to detail what you've done and what your experiences are. So the only thing I would say, and it's premature for her to have done this, but I encourage people to create a list of references, as in people who will provide you with letters of recommendation or phone calls, as a separate page, an additional page within the document. So you don't make a new document, you just make a page break and then say references. And I encourage people to do 4 to 5 references. And the references will be a combination of, well, it'll be 4 to 5, and in them you'll have the contact information, their title, and typically in parentheses next to it, the explanation of your affiliation to that person, advisor, committee member, teaching mentor, whatever, so that people want to, if they want to make a phone call to find out what your teaching is like, they can do that. And it's just a couple more than are typically required for the job. So does anybody have any comments, questions on that before I move on to a much more experienced person's CV?
Dan, is there anything else looking at that format wise that you would recommend be changed? I mean, you mentioned the dates. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that just immediately you would clean up or change. I mean, it looked impressive, of course, but just wondering.
Yeah, well, I mean, so there's some rearranging I would do in it.
Mhm.
I think that, you see these big blocks that look like jobs that she's done. And that may have been an effort to combine, to make it look a little bit more like an industry document, because it's typical to do things in a much more listy form. But it may also be because she's just a little earlier in the program and wanted to get to a 3-page document. So to me, there's a lot that I would suggest down the road would be different potentially, but it would also happen because that person would be more experienced. So I'm thinking of this for first and second years as maybe a document that would be relevant at this moment, especially when you see what I'm going to show you next. So before that, though, any questions? I know we're getting right up to the line, so I'll do this one super quick. This is a person, PhD. This person's actually a postdoc in earth sciences, was a postdoc in earth sciences. He now has a swear to God job. So name, their phone number, it's all here. And so this person will have a lot more experience than a PhD walking out the door. But it still has some parts of it that I like. Sometimes, so I'm going to pretend in a certain sense that it's not a postdoc thing. There are no work titles here for the PhD, which I think should be there. So we know that this person worked with a person named Holly A. Michael, but we don't know what the dissertation was. And one thing I would say, and I should have said this earlier, is that what's very important about a CV is a journalistic principle called above the fold. So the idea of above the fold is that when you go to buy a newspaper, do you remember paper and newspapers? It would be folded in half, right? And there would be a side facing up. And all of the eye-catching important stuff had to be on the side facing up to make you buy the newspaper. And so I think of page one of a CV, and particularly the first 3/4 of that page, as the top of the fold. So for all of you, education at this moment will be first. And then, you know, some people have a really long education section, and I get literally to the end of page one without even knowing anything else about the person. I discourage that. What I would say instead is what comes right after education is your opening gambit. It's your declaration of what's important and your best foot forward. So you're telling them, I think this is a research job, right? And here's what I want you to understand about that. This person's interesting because he's or she is splitting the difference. So you can get from page one that this person's done a bunch of different things. For most of us, that won't be the case, but that's more of the tendency with postdocs to say, like, let me tell you about all the stuff. And so it's kind of a thumbnail sketch. This is the kind of work that I do. These are sort of the keywords or tags. And then you've got this stuff. By the way, I discourage these course numbers from your materials. And the reason I do is because, you know, GL 304 becomes year 205 at a different institution. So what is it telling you? Some people will say, well, it's telling you that it's a 205, so it's a sophomore level class. Write that out, put it in parentheses. And this person's got a few work experience things, but you see it's brief. Then you got honors and awards. If you earned cold hard cash for something, you should put the amount. You should put the dollar amount. Above 1,000, I'd say. Professional activities. This is all stuff that will happen later, but you see that he's thinking now, I'm a professional, I'm in this field, I'm a scholar. These are things that I've done that are service to the profession, or courses and workshops, and then pubs. By the way, your name should be bold or italicized or something else that indicates your position on the paper. In prep, these are the rest of them that were actually published. Some people number them. You don't have to number them if you don't want to. Presentations, and it just goes on and on. But that's something that you'll see more as you go on and you move into your full productive academic selves. It's not something that you need to do now, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what might be down the road. So are there questions that I can answer? I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone's time.
What was the dollar amount you said to add?
Probably above 1,000. That's rough.
1,000.
So,
okay.
you know, something competitive that's still pretty great, that's below 1,000 you would do. But what I'm really thinking of is like GSO travel grants or other things like that that are you kind of get, period, you know, that's not really something I'd highlight.
Okay.
But God knows if you got the NSF GRFP or something like that, you got to put it, you know, make sure that people understand. In fact, that's one thing. I see people spell out the names of things where the acronym is very common. Put the acronym, right? So I don't remember what NSF GRFP stands for. You can write it all out, but people are going to know it by that acronym. So everything is about scannability. Everything is about um, my ability to read quickly and get what I need from it, to think about it more. The easier and the better I can read something briefly and think, I need to look at this more, the better off I am, the better off you are. It's funny, when I've been looking at, I've been up to my ears in fellowship applications lately, and grant applications for students. And I find that when I'm looking at a rubric, or I have some specific criteria that I'm looking at, the more listy and the more eyeball friendly it is, the more likely I am, like the easier it is to skim, the more likely I am to read. Because you're telling me where to look. So I'll look, I'll read it. If I don't know where it is, I'm probably just going to move on. Because those are the tired, sad, oh my God, why are they making me do this? Eyeballs of your reviewer. They don't do it for fun. And so it's a punishment. They got to get it over with, and then they got to move on with their lives. And your ability to give them what they need, so they go, oh, thank God, this person, I'm putting them in the pile. That's what you're going for. All right, so that was a whole big stack of stuff. There's a lot more to be said about all of these documents, but I just wanted to give an overview and give a sense of what can be effective and helpful. Thank you for having me, Amanda. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I saw some I saw some postdocs CV. They have like a 1 or 2 short paragraph or sentence describing their a motivation to looking for some type of jobs, describing their like summary of the research or teaching statement. Is that necessary or not?
In a CV?
Yeah.
No. So you mean like maybe an objective or something like that at the
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Not a good idea, not necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give some examples of like what you would put in service? So like community service, like doing work in like an organization, things like that?
Sure. So that was quiet. You were quiet, but I think you asked me about like what counts as service, right? Okay. There are 2 types of service. There's service to the university, and there's service to the profession. Service to the profession might be things like serving on grant committees, or being a manuscript reviewer, a convener of sessions, an organizer of panels, things like that. Being a member of a like a professional organization, things like that. Another form of service to the profession that's very popular in science is forms of outreach. So there might be a category for some people like that, where you've gone to the Museum of Science and Technology in Syracuse, and you did a science day with students or something like that. And that's valued, by the way, and that can be another form of service as outreach. Sometimes there are things in that category, like you wrote an article for Salon or Medium or New York Times, obviously. And so all of those things can represent that, right? The larger picture of you in community with other scientists in your discipline. The other side is service to the university, and that would be something like being on the promotion and tenure committee, serving on the GSO, working on, FPP could be one of them. Your involvement in WiSE would be one of them. And so there are a lot of things like that where you're participating in the Chancellor's Task Force for Relationship Violence, which I think is the name of one of the task forces. Those are the kinds of things that are service to your institution where you are.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, so much.
Sure.
Thank you all for participating again if you're in Syracuse, what a beautiful day, and I appreciate you being with us. This was very, very helpful. I really appreciate it, Dan. You covered a lot of ground. I asked a lot of you for sure for an hour and 15 minutes, and I think you covered a lot of ground. What I would love to do though, just take another 30 seconds, Dan, if you could just let everybody know how to get a hold of you, because you do offer wonderful support, and just highlight your office's services. Because I do know we have some undecided about academia versus industry, and some definitely going into industry. So I definitely want to highlight, if it's resume help, interviewing, I know you do a lot of stuff, so I want to make sure everybody knows that as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I just put into the chat the way to make an appointment with me on Handshake. You can write me an email and say, hey, can we get together? But frankly, then I'm going to send you the email with that link. It's really easier. You can see my up-to-date availability and pick something that works for you. And I do think that the gold star, the red carpet treatment is the individual stuff. Everybody's got a different thing going on, and everybody has different needs and different documents and so on. And so that's really what I think is the most important thing that we offer to students. Beyond that, I'm actually pretty pleased to announce or pre-announce that we're offering more support for people who are working on dissertations, which isn't all of you necessarily at this stage, or maybe not any of you. But down the road, we're going to be able to do dissertation writing groups and different ways of getting together with colleagues and work on that. We bring speakers to campus. We do a wellness series every year that I think is really great. At this point in the semester, of course, many of our programs have already kind of passed, but sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit because I'm trying to send you another link. But I think that, if you keep an eye on my emails, which are, I hope not too frequent. In fact, you're going to get one in a few hours, I believe. There's a lot of stuff that we have on offer for students. And so we have speakers that come, we partner with WiSE and many other offices on campus. I'm sending you links to, I'm going to try to find the other link here while I talk to you. It would be difficult. Links to our podcast, Syracuse University Gradcast. And one thing to say about it is that, yeah, there we go. If you're a Spotify user or an Apple Podcast user, I've got both of the links there. We have tried to cover, well, we have covered in podcast form, all of the documents for the academic job search. And so there are podcasts there about that and about many other topics. We interview speakers, we interview alumni. There's a lot of great content on there. I think we're somewhere around our 53rd or 54th episode. It's been about a year since it started. Guess what? We started it when everybody else was doing things like that because of the pandemic. And so that's great. I am also in the process of being fully vaccinated, and I'm hoping that in the summer, I can see people in 3 dimensions, especially if other people are getting vaccinated or have already been. So for me, that would be a real treat to meet people in 3 dimensions. So TBD on that. Is that a decent overview, Amanda?
That was great. That was great. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew all that you're offering. So I think that was a really great way to highlight everything, and definitely take advantage of Dan's office and Dan's one-on-one appointments and everything else they're offering, because there's lots of great support there for all of you. And I realize we're over, so I'm going to thank everybody one last time and wish you all a wonderful afternoon. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.